He walks slowly, one street at a time. The city stretches around him, enormous, dazzling, and disorienting. Everywhere he turns, there are temples, shrines, and altars draped in fresh-cut garlands, along with statues of marble so white they seem to pulse in the afternoon heat. There are gods of war, gods of wisdom, and gods of the sea, the sky, and the harvest. The Athenians do not just believe in gods, they collect them the way other people collect anxieties. And somewhere in this forest of stone and incense and sacrifice, they have even carved an inscription for the deity they might have missed, dedicated to an unknown god. His name is Paul. He is not a philosopher, at least not by the standards of Athens. He has no school, no wealthy patron, and no marbled hall. He is a tent maker from Tarsus with a complicated past and a message he cannot stop himself from delivering. Luke, who knew him, records what happened inside Paul the moment he entered the city. He does not describe it as wonder, and he does not describe it as admiration. He says Paul's spirit was provoked. That is the exact word, provoked. It is the kind of stirring that happens when you are not impressed, but when you see something so profoundly wrong that staying quiet becomes a kind of betrayal. So Paul goes to the agora, the marketplace, the beating heart of Athenian public life, and he begins to speak. At first, they dismiss him. Some call him a spermologos, a seed picker, a scavenger of second-hand ideas, stitching together something half-baked and calling it truth. But then something shifts, because Paul keeps using a word they have never encountered. It is two words, actually, paired together like a name alongside a name, like two deities traveling as one, Jesus and Anastasis. They bring him to the Areopagus, the ancient court of the thinkers, carved from the living rock of Mars Hill above the city, and they ask him to explain himself. What happens in that moment contains a mystery that most people have never noticed, and once you see it, you will not be able to read the resurrection the same way again. Jesus and Anastasis. They thought they were hearing about two new gods. Here is the question that is going to open everything up. What if they were not entirely wrong? The word is anastasis. Anastasis. You can feel the shape of it even if you have never studied Greek. The weight of it, the momentum of it. It appears 42 times in the New Testament. Every single time it is translated the same way in our English Bibles, resurrection. We say that word constantly. It appears on church signs and Easter cards and the creeds we have memorized since childhood. We say it so often that it passes through our minds without touching anything. It has become furniture, comfortable and unexamined. But the Athenians did not have a word for it. They had concepts of the afterlife, shadowy realms, immortal souls ascending to some Elysian rest, and the dead wandering in a pale underworld. But the idea that a dead body could stand back up, that a corpse could be transformed into a living, glorified, permanent existence, that death could be not merely survived but undone, they had no category for that. So when Paul kept using this word anastasis, their Greek minds did what Greek minds always did with powerful, abstract, world-shaking forces. They turned it into a person. She became, in their hearing, a goddess named Anastasis. She was the deity of this new world Paul was announcing, paired with this Jesus who had died and then apparently shattered that very category. Luke records it in Acts chapter 17, verse 18. Some of the philosophers said, "He seems to be a proclaimer of strange demons." The word translated demons here is daimonia, not evil spirits in the modern sense, but divine beings, foreign deities. They genuinely heard two names, Jesus and Anastasis. It was a misunderstanding, but at the same time, stay with me, it was the most accurate misunderstanding in the history of the ancient world. So what does the word actually mean? This is the moment to slow down, because what you are about to see has been hidden in plain sight for 2,000 years. The Greek word anastasis is built from two parts. The first part, ana, means up or again or back towards something higher. The second part, stasis, comes from the verb histemi. It means to stand, a position, a posture, an orientation towards. Put them together, anastasis, the standing up. It is not returning to life, not resuming existence, not breathing again or a heartbeat starting again or simply opening your eyes after they had closed. It is the standing back up. The Greek language has other words for coming back from death, like egerthesis and zopeo. Paul and the Gospel writers had options. When the New Testament uses the word anastasis again and again and again, it is making a specific choice. It is saying something precise, not that someone died and then they did not, but that someone was lying on the ground and then they stood. There is posture in this word. There is dignity in this word. There is authority in this word. The resurrection of Jesus Christ is not merely a biological reversal. It is a coronation. Think about what preceded it. He was arrested in a garden, tried in a series of mockeries they called courts, flogged until the skin came off his back, and a crown of thorns was hammered onto his skull. He carried his own execution device through a city that cheered for his death. He was nailed, hands and feet, to wood, lifted up for everyone to see. And when it was finally over, he was taken down, wrapped in burial cloth, and sealed behind a stone in the dark, pressed into the earth. Every direction was down. Every force was downward. Gravity, shame, abandonment, death, the full weight of every sin ever committed was pressed onto one man and then sealed into the ground. That is what was lying in that tomb. And then, Anastasis, the standing back up in a posture that announced to the entire cosmos, I was never conquered. I never stopped being king. One word carries all of that. And we have been skimming past it for centuries. Now, here is where this stops being a word study and becomes something else entirely. There is a road outside a village called Bethany. A woman is walking towards Jesus on that road and she is not okay. Her brother has been dead for 4 days. Not sick, not unconscious, but dead. The stone is sealed. The burial spices have done their work. The mourners have already arrived, and Martha has moved past the sharp, sudden sting of loss into something harder. The dull, settled weight of the permanent. She says to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. She believes in the resurrection, she says so in the next breath. But listen to how she believes in it. I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day, future tense. Distant at the end of history. A theological comfort, something real but far away. Something true, but not today. And Jesus stops her, not to agree, not to nod along, not to offer comfort in the shape of a better version of what she already said. He says 7 words, and those 7 words are the most audacious sentence ever spoken on this earth. I am the resurrection and the life. Not I will bring the resurrection, not I have power over the resurrection, not I can cause the resurrection for those who qualify. I am it. He is not pointing to an event on a calendar. He is not describing a mechanism he controls from a distance. He is identifying himself, his person, his being, his name with the very thing Martha had placed safely in a distant future. The resurrection is not something Jesus does. It is something Jesus is. And now go back to the marketplace in Athens. The philosophers who heard the word Anastasis, and whose Greek minds immediately reached for a person, for a name, for a face behind the force. They thought they were making an error. They were not. They were doing something instinctive, something ancient, something that turned out, against all odds, to be exactly right. Because on a road in Bethany, before their question even existed, Jesus had already given the answer. I am the Anastasis. The Athenians heard a word and felt in their bones that it must be a name. They were right. They just did not know whose. Now, I want to show you something that most Western Christians have never seen. There is an ancient image, an icon to be precise. And in the Eastern Orthodox tradition, it carries a specific title, the Anastasis. In Western Christianity, the same event is called the harrowing of hell, but the Eastern Church names it with that one Greek word, and the image will stop you. In the center stands Jesus, not lying in a tomb, not glowing peacefully at a garden entrance, but standing. The white of his robes is so bright, it almost pulses against the darkness around him. His posture is not passive, not contemplative, not serene in the way we sometimes like to imagine resurrection. It is urgent. His feet are planted on 2 massive doors, shattered, broken off their hinges, scattered beneath him like defeated things. These are the gates of Hades. He broke them on his way in. He is leaving now. And on his left and his right, rising from open tombs in the broken ground, are 2 ancient figures. They are white-haired, frail, their faces holding an expression caught between wonder and bewilderment, as if they cannot fully comprehend what is happening to them. They are Adam and Eve, the first humans, the ones who, through their choice, ushered the whole human story into the shadow of death. They are here, at the bottom of history, at the root of the problem, and Christ is pulling them out. But here is the detail. This is the detail that does not let you go. Look at how he holds them. Not by their hands, but by their wrists. The grip is around the wrist, not the palm, not the fingers. The hand and the fingers require effort from the one being held, a grip, a participation, a contribution to your own rescue. If you want to hold someone's hand, they have to want to hold yours. The wrist requires nothing. You can hold a wrist even when the hand is limp, even when the fingers are uncurled, even when there is no strength left. You can hold it even when the person being pulled has been dead for so long they have forgotten what standing feels like. He is not asking Adam and Eve to hold on to him. He is holding on to them. The Anastasis icon is a portrait of pure grace, a total sovereign unilateral initiative, the salvation that begins and ends in the one who stands. And behind Adam and Eve, there are others. David, Solomon, John the Baptist, the righteous dead of every age, standing in the background waiting for their turn in the grip. The image says this: the anastasis of Jesus is not a private event. It is an extraction, a rescue operation into the lowest depths, and it started before anyone on the surface knew it was happening. Now, here is where it gets deeper. Paul is sitting somewhere with a writing instrument and a limited amount of time. He has churches to care for, enemies closing in, and things he needs people to understand before it is too late. And in his letter to Ephesus, he says something most people have read 100 times without it ever fully landing. He says that God, being rich in mercy, because of the great love with which he loved us, did 3 things when he raised Christ from the dead. He made us alive together with him. He raised us up together with him. He seated us together with him in the heavenly places. 3 verbs, 3 actions. Now, look at the Greek, because this is where the ground shifts. All 3 of those words share a prefix, sin. In Greek, sin means with, together, alongside, bound to. It is the same prefix in words like symphony, meaning sounds moving together, or synchronize, meaning times aligned as one. You were made alive with Christ, sin, together. You were raised with Christ, sin, together. You are seated with Christ, sin, together. And here is the detail that should make you sit very still. Paul writes all 3 of those verbs in the past tense. Not will be, not might be if you are faithful enough, not could be if you keep working on yourself. Has been, already happened, done. The people who are in Christ have already been raised. The grip has already been applied. The wrist has already been pulled. You are not waiting to be extracted from the darkness. The extraction is complete. There is another moment in John chapter 11 that most people miss. It is not the miracle itself, but something in the contrast the miracle creates. Lazarus has been in that tomb for 4 days. The stone is sealed. The burial spices have done their work. The mourners have filled the house. And then, in a moment that will be talked about for the rest of human history, Jesus calls into the darkness and a dead man walks out. The crowd is undone. People who came to mourn leave preaching. It is a miracle of the highest order. But here is what must be said about Lazarus. Lazarus is going to die again. He comes back to the same body, the same mortal, breakable, aging body. He resumes his old life. He eats dinner that evening. He goes to sleep. He wakes up in the morning. He will get older. He will eventually get sick, and he will die. What happened to Lazarus is breathtaking, but it is not what happened to Jesus. Jesus did not simply resume. He did not return to the same body, the same limitations, the same mortal framework. What Paul describes in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 is something entirely unprecedented in the history of human experience. It is a body that is the same. As he shows his wounds, he eats fish on a beach, and Thomas touches his hands. And yet it is transformed, glorified, permanent. He appears in locked rooms. He is sometimes unrecognized by people who knew him for years. He eats, he breathes, he speaks, and he ascends. The body that was broken is now unbreakable. The life that ended is now unending. What happened to Lazarus is resuscitation. What happened to Jesus is anastasis, a standing into an entirely new kind of existence. Not a return, not a resumption, a transformation. Broken, buried, glorified. And that is the resurrection you are promised. Not a return to this beautiful, fragile, temporary life. Not Lazarus walking out of the tomb and ordering lunch, but a body that will never break again, an existence that death cannot enter. An anastasis. And according to Paul, for those who are in Christ, that anastasis has already begun. I want to pause here for a moment and speak directly to you. Maybe you have been in a season where it feels like nothing can stand back up. A marriage that has fallen so far you cannot imagine any version of it restored. A dream you carried for years, the kind you whispered about at night, and it did not happen, and you stopped believing it could. Maybe a friendship that ended in a way that still stings 3 years later. Maybe it is your faith, and I say this with genuine care. Maybe your faith has felt like a structure that lost its foundation, and you have been trying to hold it together through sheer willpower. Maybe you are watching this late at night because the quiet gets too loud. I want to ask you a question, and I mean it sincerely. What word is describing your current season? Finished or not yet standing? Because those are very different words, and only one of them tells the full truth about where resurrection is in the story. If any of this has been landing for you, I would love to know. Leave a comment and tell me what you are thinking about. And if this kind of deep exploration is something you want to return to, consider subscribing. There is more coming, and I do not want you to miss it. There is a Roman prison somewhere in the empire. The exact location is debated. What is not debated is who is inside it. Because there is something in Philippians chapter 3 that I find almost impossible to get past. Paul is writing from prison. He is old. He is near the end of his life, and he knows it. He has planted churches across the Mediterranean world. He has written letters that 2,000 years later are still rearranging people's entire understanding of God. He has preached Christ in synagogues and marketplaces and courts and prisons and the decks of sinking ships. 5 times he received the Jewish 39 lashes. 3 times he was beaten with Roman rods. 3 times shipwrecked, once stoned and left for dead outside a city that had just tried to kill him. He knows the theology of resurrection better than almost anyone alive. He wrote 1 Corinthians chapter 15. And yet, in Philippians chapter 3 verse 10, with chains on his wrists, he prays this, that I may know him and the power of his resurrection. Wait, Paul wants to know the power of the anastasis? He is still praying for it? He does not already have it, after all of that? And here is what I think he means. The word translated power in that verse is the Greek dunamis. You recognize it in words like dynamite, dynamic, and dynamo. It is the word for raw, explosive, world-altering energy. It is the word used for things that cannot be contained by normal categories. Paul is saying, inside the anastasis, there is a dunamis, a living, active force. It is not a memory of what God once did, not a theological position, but a force, currently available, currently moving. And this is the part that should reconfigure everything. In Romans chapter 8, verse 11, Paul writes this, if the spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead dwells in you, he who raised Christ Jesus from the dead will also give life to your mortal bodies through his spirit who dwells in you. The same spirit, the same dunamis, the same energy that shattered the gates of Hades, the same energy that pulled Adam from his tomb, that transformed a broken body into a glorious one, that rolled back 2,000 years of death's claim on the human story. That spirit lives in you, not beside you, not above you, not available if you pray hard enough or perform well enough. In you, which means the power of the anastasis is not a distant hope. It is a present resident. Come back to the icon one more time. Christ in the darkness, robes blazing, feet on shattered gates, the wrist grip on Adam, the wrist grip on Eve, pulling. There is something about that image I did not say earlier. Something about the direction of the pull. He is not pulling them sideways. He is not pulling them toward him as if they will stand beside him at the same level. He is pulling them upward. Ana, up. again toward the higher thing. The anastasis is not a horizontal rescue. It is a vertical one. He does not bring you back to where you were. He brings you up to where he is. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 6 again. He seated us with him in the heavenly places. The destination of the anastasis is not restored earth life. The destination is the throne room, the place where Christ sits, having stood back up, having been vindicated by the Father, having been given the name above every name. The wrist grip lifts you there, seated, hidden already, and one day, visible. Now, let me gather every thread we have pulled. We started in Athens, in a marketplace shining with marble and drowning in gods, a small Jewish man in a crowd of philosophers, and the crowd hearing a word, Anastasis, and turning it instinctively into a person, a goddess, a divine being. Because the word was so unprecedented, so category-breaking, so alive with power, that the Greek imagination could not receive it as merely an event. It had to be a person, and they were right. On a road in Bethany, Jesus had already claimed it as his name. I am the Anastasis, not a force he directs, not an event he schedules, but himself, his identity. The standing up is not what he does, it is who he is. We trace the word itself. Ana, up, stasis, standing. Not simply life after death, but a specific posture, a dignity, an authority, a body that was pressed into the ground and stood, and in standing, declared that the earth does not get the final word about what belongs in it. We looked at the icon, Christ descending into the deepest darkness, not to be trapped there, but to empty it. The wrist grip that requires nothing from the one being held. Grace in its most radical form. Not help, but rescue. Not assistance, but extraction. We read Paul's letter from prison, the man who wrote the resurrection still praying to know its power. Because doctrine and experience are two different countries, and Paul was not satisfied to live in only one of them. We heard the past tense of Ephesians chapter 2, raised us up with him, already finished. The anastasis of Christ and the anastasis of the believer are not two separate events. They are one event in two dimensions. His was visible, yours is hidden, but both are done. Colossians chapter 3 opens with a phrase that sounds conditional in English, if then you have been raised with Christ. In Greek, this is eon, a first-class conditional, which in Greek is not a real if, it is a logical sense, a word that assumes the premise is true. The translator might just as accurately write, since you have been raised with Christ, since, already. Because of that reality, because the wrist grip has already happened, because the sin prefix has already bound you to his rising. Paul says, seek the things above, where Christ is. Not because you are trying to get there, but because that is where you already are, hidden, seated, Anastasis. And in verse 4, Paul pulls the curtain back on the final movement of the story. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory. The anastasis that has happened in secret will become visible to all of creation. The standing up that occurred in the spiritual reality will one day manifest fully in the physical one. Go back to Athens one final time. Paul standing on the Areopagus, the philosophers watching him. Some arms folded, some squinting, some genuinely, reluctantly curious. The Acropolis behind him, the city below him, the whole ancient world spread out in every direction. And he is trying to explain something that has no category in their world. He is trying to explain that death is not the final posture of the human story, that the universe's last word is not fallen, that the ground is not where things end. He is trying to explain that there is a man, in a real body, with wounds you could touch, who was laid in the earth and stood back up. And in standing back up, he pulled with him everything that had ever been pressed down, every buried hope, every broken thing, every person who had given up on the idea of standing. This, Paul says, is the anastasis, and some of them laughed, some walked away, but some of them stayed. Luke tells us, some joined him and believed. They had never heard the word before, and once they heard it, they could not unhear it. Maybe you have been pressed down for a long time, not metaphorically, but genuinely. The weight of what you have been carrying, the grief, the guilt, the failure, the fear, the exhaustion. An exhaustion that has become so familiar, it no longer feels like exhaustion. and has started to feel like just you. Maybe it has been so heavy for so long that you have forgotten what it felt like to stand. Maybe you stopped expecting to. Hear this. The anastasis is not a metaphor. It is not wishful thinking dressed in religious language. It is not a coping mechanism or a comfort story we tell ourselves to get through the dark. It is the most verified event in the ancient world. It is a single claim that the most powerful empire in human history, with every motive to silence it and every resource to investigate it, could not disprove. They could not produce a body. They could not stop the witnesses. They could not quiet the hundreds of men and women who had seen him after, touched him after, eaten with him after, and who walked into courts and prisons and execution sites still saying the same thing. He stood back up. We were there. We saw. And because he stood back up, you can. Not in your own strength, not through willpower or determination, or having finally figured out the right perspective. The icon is clear about this. You are the wrist. The grip belongs to him. The strength belongs to him. The initiative belongs to him. But the dunamis, the power of the anastasis, is not stored somewhere distant waiting for the right conditions. It is in you. It is in the Spirit who raised Christ from the dead, and who, according to Paul, currently dwells in you. The same force that shattered the gates of Hades is living in you, waiting to stand through you. The Greek philosophers of Athens had names for everything: beauty, truth, justice. They had altars for every fear and every hope. But they had no name for this until a small man stood in their marketplace and kept saying a word they had never heard. Anastasis, the standing up, the rising, the posture of something that was buried and could not be kept there. And their Greek minds, brilliant, searching, trained to hear power in words, heard that word and instinctively reached for a name. Because power like that must have a face. Power like that must have a presence. Power like that must be personal. They were not wrong. They were just 2,000 years early. Because the one who stood back up in a garden outside Jerusalem looked out at all of human history. He looked at every pressed down person, every buried hope, every life that had been told by circumstance or failure or death that this is where you stay. And he said the 7 words, not, I brought the resurrection, not, I will cause the resurrection. I am the anastasis. I am the standing up. I am the thing you were waiting for. I have already gripped your wrist, and I have not finished standing.